Once upon a time, in the lively town of Amufia, there was a young seamstress named Neka. She was the youngest of 4 sisters, all of whom were admired for their striking beauty and curvy figures. But Neka was different, slim and delicate, with a quiet strength often overlooked. While her sisters basked in the attention of admirers and the praise of their mother, Neka struggled with feelings of inadequacy, wishing to be seen for more than her modest frame. She yearned for acceptance and recognition, but never got any. One day, Neka was making a dress for one of her clients in her workshop. Neka's fingers moved quickly over the colorful fabric she was sewing, her needle weaving in and out with practiced precision. She was so focused on the fabric that she didn't even hear her sister Ogochi enter the room. "Neka, you haven't seen anything. Just wait till you hear," Ogochi said with a smirk, her voice cutting through the quiet rhythm of the sewing machine. Neka paused, sighing softly to herself, and looked up at her sister's reflection in the cracked mirror leaning against the wall. "What is it this time, Ogochi?" she asked, feigning a calmness she didn't feel. Her sister always seemed to find something to tease her about. Even now, Neka could see Ogochi's exaggerated sway as she walked, her hand resting on her hip as if to emphasize the curves she was so proud of. "Oh, Neka, you'll never believe it. Mama and Ani Chinyur just came back from the market, and guess what all the traders were talking about? My new Ankara skirt. One woman even called me the pride of Amufia." Ogochi did a dramatic twirl, her wide hips and round backside swaying as she turned. "Can you imagine?" Neka forced a polite smile and nodded. "Yes, Ogochi, I can imagine. After all, you remind me every day," she muttered under her breath, though Ogochi didn't hear it. Ogochi was used to hearing praise and compliments wherever she went, and she took it all as her due. After all, she and her sisters Ngozi and Amara were all blessed with the kind of curvy figures that turned heads and drew whispers in their small town. Neka, however, was the odd one out, the only one with a slim figure and hips as narrow as a boy's. It was something she'd learned to live with even if it stung. Ogochi didn't seem to notice Neka's discomfort as she continued boasting. "Amara and I are going to Madame Adeabi's boutique to see if she can make us another dress just like this one. She says women like us are her best models because we can fill out any style. Do you want to come along, Neka?" Ogochi asked, her voice sweet but her eyes glinting with mischief. Neka shook her head. "No, I have work to do here," she replied, her voice steady. She turned her attention back to her sewing, but her hands faltered slightly as she stitched, her fingers tense. "Oh well," Ogochi said with a shrug. "It's not like you'd find anything that suits your shape anyway." She gave a little laugh as she turned to leave. As soon as Ogochi's footsteps faded down the hall, Neka's calm mask crumbled. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, her shoulders sagging with a sigh. "Shape? I have a shape, don't I?" she whispered to herself, running her hands over her sides and turning this way and that. But no matter how she looked at herself, she couldn't ignore the fact that she had none of the curves that seemed to bless her sisters. Compared to them, she felt like a stick figure. She spent the rest of the afternoon working quietly in the small sewing room at the back of the house, trying to lose herself in her stitching, hoping to forget the remarks that had wormed their way into her thoughts. But even when she was alone, the words lingered, a quiet echo that chipped away at her confidence. Later that evening, the family gathered around the dinner table. Neka's mother, Mama Chinyur, was serving plates of pounded yam and egusi soup, her gaze warm and proud as she looked at her daughters. "Ah, Ngozi, Ogochi, Amara, the 3 of you brought honor to this house today. Everywhere I went in the market, people were talking about my beautiful daughters, saying how well-endowed and graceful you all are." Neka tried to focus on her food, but her mother's words brought that familiar pang of bitterness. She knew Mama Chinyur didn't mean to leave her out, but it happened so often that Neka had started to expect it. It was as if, to her mother, she was invisible unless she did something to stand out, something her family would approve of. "Neka," Mama Chinyur said suddenly, turning to her, "are you eating well, my dear? You look so thin. Maybe we should give you an extra portion of yam. Perhaps then you'll fill out like your sisters." Her father, Baba Ifani, chuckled from the head of the table. "Mama, leave Neka alone. Not everyone has to look like a market queen. She has her own beauty." Neka managed a small smile of thanks in her father's direction, but her mother was relentless. "Beauty? I know she's beautiful, but she could use a little… what do you call it?" She gestured to her own hips and chuckled. "Some of this, eh?" The sisters laughed, and Neka felt herself sinking deeper into her seat. She could feel their eyes on her, and no matter how hard she tried to ignore it, a flush of embarrassment crept up her cheeks. "It's all right, Mama," she mumbled, her gaze fixed on her plate. "I don't mind." Mama Chinyere gave a dismissive wave. "Fine, fine. But remember, beauty is a gift. Your sisters are lucky to have been blessed with such figures. You could learn a thing or two from them." The meal continued, and though the conversation moved on, Neka couldn't shake the feeling of being singled out. The rest of the family seemed oblivious to her discomfort, laughing and talking about their day, while Neka sat in silence, her thoughts spiraling inward. After dinner, her sisters gathered in the sitting room, admiring each other's outfits and talking excitedly about the upcoming town festival. Neka excused herself and retreated to her room, eager for some quiet. But even alone in her room, Neka couldn't escape the nagging thoughts that plagued her. She stood in front of her small mirror, trying to see herself with kinder eyes. She turned and tried to look at herself from different angles, but no matter how she adjusted her stance or the angle of the mirror, she couldn't see the beauty everyone seemed to value so highly. The next morning, Neka woke up early and prepared to head to Madame Adeabi's shop, where she worked as an apprentice seamstress. She had always loved working with fabric, the way colors and patterns could come together to create something beautiful. It was her escape, her way of finding a piece of herself that felt worthwhile. At the shop, she was greeted by Chisholm, her friend and fellow apprentice, who was setting up rolls of fabric in the front display. "Ah, Neka, you look a little down," Chisholm said, giving her a concerned look. "What happened? Did your sisters tease you again?" Neka shrugged, trying to brush it off. "It's nothing, really. Just the usual talk about how they're all so, well, and how I'm not." Chisholm frowned, reaching out to squeeze Neka's hand. "Neka, you're beautiful just as you are. Honestly, all that talk about big hips and curves, it's just a trend. What really matters is what's inside." She leaned closer and whispered, "And don't forget, you have brains and skills that many people would envy. You're more than just what's outside." Neka felt a small surge of warmth at her friend's words. "Thank you, Chisholm. I know you're right. It's just hard sometimes." They worked in silence for a while, the shop gradually filling up with customers. As the day wore on, Neka focused on her tasks, grateful for the distraction. She lost herself in the motions of sewing and measuring, carefully cutting fabric and watching her designs come to life. When she worked, she felt at peace, and her worries seemed to fade. Around midday, a familiar voice cut through the shop's quiet bustle. "Ah, Neka, there you are." Neka looked up to see her mother entering the shop, her face beaming. Behind her were Ngozi and Agochi, their expressions smug as they looked around the shop, taking in the bustling atmosphere. "Neka, my dear, your sisters need some new dresses for the festival next week," Mama Chinyere announced, glancing pointedly at Madame Adeabi, who nodded with a warm smile. "Of course, Madame Chinyere. I'm sure Neka will make them the finest dresses," Madame Adeabi replied, motioning for Neka to assist her sisters. Neka clenched her jaw but forced herself to remain professional. She led her sisters to a corner of the shop where they could choose fabrics. As they browsed, Ngozi leaned closer and whispered, "Neka, maybe one day you'll get some curves if you eat more. Then you won't have to hide here in the back." Sewing like a little mouse, Neka bit her lip, refusing to take the bait. She knew they didn't mean to be cruel, but the words stung all the same. As the afternoon wore on, Neka helped them select fabrics and take their measurements, forcing herself to remain polite. When they finally left, she let out a long sigh, feeling drained. "Are you all right?" Chisholm asked, coming over to help clean up the fabric her sisters had left behind. Neka nodded, though her expression was weary. "I will be. One day, maybe, I'll learn to ignore them." Chisholm gave her a reassuring smile. You don't have to change for anyone, Neka. Remember that. As Neka walked home that evening, her thoughts returned to her family's words, the way they saw her as different, as somehow less. But somewhere deep inside, a small voice reminded her of her worth. It was faint, like a whisper in the wind, but it was there, and she decided that, no matter what anyone said, she would hold on to it. Neka woke up before dawn, her head buzzing with determination. Today would be different, she told herself. She'd spent most of the night lying awake, thinking about her sisters, her mother's comments, and her own feelings of inadequacy. But instead of despair, a strange resolve had crept over her. "I'll do something about it," she whispered, as though saying the words out loud would make her stronger. She began her day early, slipping quietly out of her room so she wouldn't wake her sisters. Neka gathered ingredients from the kitchen: yam, beans, and palm oil. She had heard somewhere that if she ate enough, she could start gaining the weight that would make her hips wider, her figure fuller. She wasn't sure if it would work, but she was desperate enough to try anything. As the sun rose, Neka sat alone in the corner of the kitchen, eating with determination. Bite after bite, she pushed herself, even when her stomach protested. By the time she finished, she felt uncomfortably full, her belly stretched and aching. But she had a strange sense of satisfaction, like this was a step forward. Her mother, Mama Chinyere, soon entered the kitchen, surprised to find Neka already up and eating. "Neka, you're up early," her mother remarked, eyeing the empty plates with a raised brow. "And look at all this food. Ha, maybe I was wrong. Perhaps you do want to gain a little weight." Neka forced a smile, swallowing the discomfort in her stomach. "Yes, Mama. I thought, maybe it's time I tried to look more like everyone else." Mama Chinyere looked at her daughter with an approving smile. "That's the spirit, Neka. You'll see how much better you'll feel. Just keep eating well, my dear." Encouraged by her mother's approval, Neka stuck to her new plan with single-minded determination. Day after day, she ate heavy portions of food, even when she was no longer hungry, all in the hopes of gaining weight. She started reading about exercises that could enhance her hips and practiced every night before bed. In her heart, though, doubts still lingered. She wasn't sure this would make her truly happy, but she felt like she had to try. After a week, Neka began wearing extra layers of fabric under her skirts, hoping to give the illusion of curves. The padding was uncomfortable, and she could barely walk without feeling awkward, but she told herself it would be worth it. She kept it a secret, feeling a strange sense of shame for what she was doing. She didn't want anyone to know how far she was going to fit in, not even Chisholm. But her efforts hadn't gone unnoticed. One day, as she was adjusting the padding in the mirror at the seamstress shop, Chisholm walked in unexpectedly. "Neka, what are you doing?" Chisholm's eyes were wide with shock and concern as she looked at Neka's layered skirts. Neka froze, her face turning red. She hadn't wanted anyone to see her like this. "Chisholm, She struggled for words, but nothing came. Chisholm stepped closer, her voice gentle but firm. "Neka, why are you doing this to yourself?" Neka lowered her gaze, feeling a rush of shame. I want to look like them. My sisters. Everyone admires them. Even Mama is always saying how beautiful they are. How well they fit in." Her voice was barely a whisper, choked with frustration. Chisholm shook her head, placing a hand on Neka's shoulder. "But Neka, do you really think this will make you happy? Forcing yourself to be something you're not?" "I don't know," Neka replied, swallowing hard. "But I'm tired of feeling like I don't belong. I just want people to notice me." For once, Chisholm gave her a sad smile, her eyes full of understanding. "Neka, the people who really care about you don't need you to change. They see your worth already." "I see your worth." Neka looked away, feeling the weight of her friend's words. But part of her wasn't ready to listen. She'd already gone so far, put in so much effort. She couldn't back down now. A few days later, an opportunity came for Neka to put her new look to the test. The annual town festival was just around the corner, and the marketplace was buzzing with excitement. There would be music, food, dancing, and, of course, the chance for everyone to show off their finest attire. For Neka, this was her chance to shine, or so she hoped. She spent days preparing, sewing herself a fitted skirt with vibrant patterns, carefully adjusting the padding to create a more curvaceous look. She wanted to make sure no one would see through her illusion. It wasn't just a festival. It was her moment to prove, at least to herself, that she could stand beside her sisters and be noticed. When the day of the festival arrived, Neka's sisters were delighted by the festivities and the attention they received. As they walked through the marketplace together, the crowd parted for them, and men glanced admiringly in their direction. Neka walked alongside her sisters, feeling a sense of pride she'd never felt before. She couldn't ignore the curious looks she received, some even nodding approvingly. She felt a thrill run through her. But just as she was starting to enjoy the moment, something unexpected happened. One of the market women, a family friend named Auntie Nkechi, pulled her aside and gave her a strange look. "Neka, my dear, you look different today. Have you been eating more?" Auntie Nkechi's eyes traveled over her figure, curiosity flickering across her face. Neka forced a smile, trying to sound casual. Yes, Auntie. I've been trying to." She shrugged, hoping to brush it off, but her cheeks burned with embarrassment. Auntie Nkechi narrowed her eyes, her expression skeptical. Well, it's good you're taking care of yourself. But be careful. Oh, beauty is not in hips and curves alone. Don't make yourself uncomfortable for others." Neka nodded politely, but her stomach twisted. As she walked away, the joy she had felt moments before started to fade. She began noticing how the extra padding made it hard to move freely, how she felt stiff and unnatural, like a stranger in her own body. The final straw came when she and her sisters joined the dance at the center of the festival. They swayed to the music, their laughter echoing through the square. But when Neka tried to join in, the padding shifted awkwardly, and she stumbled. People around her chuckled, and though it wasn't cruel laughter, it felt like a spotlight on her deception. Her sisters, noticing her struggle, gave her puzzled looks. Ngozi whispered, "Neka, what's wrong with you? You're moving like someone carrying a bag of rice." Neka forced a laugh, but her face burned with embarrassment. She tried to keep up, but she felt like she was failing miserably. Her confidence shattered, and her heart sank as she realized that all her efforts had only made her feel worse. As the evening wore on, she found herself slipping away from the festivities, unable to face the crowd any longer. She felt foolish and humiliated, like she'd betrayed herself just to fit into a mold that wasn't meant for her. She walked alone, away from the noise, until she found a quiet spot by the river on the edge of town. Sitting there, staring at her reflection in the water, Neka felt a mixture of anger and sadness. She thought of all the hours she had spent trying to become something she wasn't, of the discomfort and shame that came with hiding her true self. And for what? To gain the approval of people who only valued her for superficial things? Neka! She looked up to see Chisholm, who had followed her from the festival. Her friend's face was filled with concern as she approached and sat beside her. "Neka, why did you leave?" "I was looking everywhere for you," Chisholm said gently, wrapping an arm around her friend's shoulders. Neka sighed, feeling the tears that had been building up finally spill over. I tried so hard, Chisholm. I did everything I could to look like them, to be like them. But in the end, I just felt empty." Chisholm nodded, her gaze kind and understanding. "That's because you were doing it for the wrong reasons, Neka. You were trying to be someone else, not yourself. I just wanted to feel like I belonged," Neka whispered, her voice trembling. "But maybe I was wrong." Chisholm squeezed her shoulder. "Neka, you do belong. But you need to find your own way to stand out, not by copying your sisters, but by being who you truly are. You're already special. You just have to see it for yourself." For the first time, Neka felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Maybe Chisholm was right. Maybe she didn't need to change herself to be noticed. Maybe, just maybe, she could find her own way to shine. As they walked back to the festival together, Neka felt a strange sense of lightness. She was still unsure of what her path would be, but she knew one thing. She was done pretending. It was time to start discovering her true self, however long it took. And for the first time, that idea didn't scare her. It filled her with a quiet strength she hadn't known she had. The days after the festival felt strangely peaceful for Neka. She stopped fussing over her appearance and let go of her obsession with trying to fit into a mold that didn't suit her. She focused on her work at Madame Adeaby's seamstress shop, pouring her energy into each stitch, each design. There was something fulfilling about creating beautiful clothes, and for the first time, she felt herself genuinely enjoying her craft. It was during one of these quiet mornings at the shop that Neka noticed a small, folded note on her work table. Her name was written on it in careful, neat handwriting. Confused, she glanced around, but the shop was empty. Chisholm was out running errands, and Madame Adeaby was in the back room. She opened the note, her heart racing with curiosity. Neka, I've watched you work from afar, and I admire your quiet strength and patience. You have a unique beauty that's rare to find. I just wanted you to know that someone sees it. Your secret admirer. Neka's cheeks warmed as she read the words. A secret admirer? For a moment, she was speechless. She reread the note, savoring each line, feeling a spark of excitement she hadn't felt before. Someone had noticed her, truly noticed her, not for how she looked but for something deeper. Over the next few days, more notes appeared on her work table, each one filled with kind words and genuine admiration. The mysterious admirer praised her skills, her creativity, and the way she carried herself with grace, even when she felt overlooked. Neka found herself smiling more often, her heart light with the thought that someone valued her for who she was. Finally, one afternoon, as she was hemming a dress, a young man entered the shop. He was tall and lean, with gentle eyes and a warm smile. Neka recognized him from the town square. Chinedu, a quiet, bookish young man who often visited the shop to bring Madame Adeaby books for her children. Chinedu cleared his throat, looking slightly nervous. "Good afternoon, Neka," he greeted, his voice soft. I hope I'm not interrupting." Neka looked up, surprised. "Oh no, Chinedu, not at all. How can I help you?" Chinedu hesitated, his gaze shifting to the floor. "Actually, I came to see you." He pulled a small note from his pocket and placed it on her work table, meeting her eyes with a shy smile. "I think it's time I stop hiding behind these notes." Neka's eyes widened as she realized what he meant. You're the one who's been writing to me?" He nodded, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yes, I wanted to tell you in person, but I wasn't sure how. You see, Neka, I've admired you for a long time. The way you work, the way you carry yourself. It's inspiring." Neka felt her cheeks flush, but this time, it wasn't from embarrassment. It was from a warmth that spread through her at his words. No one had ever spoken to her this way before, and it felt both thrilling and humbling. Chinedu continued, his gaze earnest. "I know it might seem strange, but I've seen you struggle, trying to fit in with everyone else. And I just wanted you to know that, to me, you're perfect as you are. You don't need to change a single thing." His words lingered in the air, gentle and sincere, and Neka felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them back, smiling up at him. "Thank you, Chinedu. That means more to me than you could know." They talked for a while longer, sharing stories about their lives and dreams. Neka found herself opening up to him in ways she hadn't with anyone else. Chinedu listened with genuine interest, his attention focused on her, as if she were the most fascinating person in the world. After he left, Neka felt a renewed sense of confidence. She hadn't just gained a friend. She had found someone who saw her worth beyond appearances. She decided right then to focus on what truly mattered to her, her work, her talents, and the people who appreciated her for who she was. As the days passed, Neka poured herself into her work with a fresh passion. Her designs grew bolder, her stitches more intricate, and her confidence shone in every piece she created. Madame Adeaby noticed the change and encouraged her to enter a regional fashion competition coming up in a few weeks. "Neka, you have a gift," Madame Adeaby said one afternoon, watching as Neka carefully embroidered a dress. You should share it with the world. Why don't you enter the competition? You have nothing to lose and everything to gain. At first, Nneka hesitated, unsure if she was ready to put herself out there. But Chinedu's words echoed in her mind, filling her with a quiet strength she hadn't felt before. She could do this. She could show the world who she was. Not as the sister who didn't fit in, but as Nneka, a skilled seamstress with her own unique voice. She spent late nights working on her entry, designing a dress that captured her journey. Simple yet elegant, with touches of bold colors that symbolized her growth and newfound confidence. It was a dress unlike anything she'd ever made, a reflection of her true self. When the day of the competition arrived, Nneka felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Chinedu was there to support her, his presence steady and reassuring. As she presented her dress to the judges, she held her head high, feeling a sense of pride and belonging she had never experienced before. The judges praised her work, admiring the originality and craftsmanship. Nneka didn't win first place, but she earned a well-deserved second, and the audience's applause felt like a victory in itself. For the first time, she was seen for her talents, her hard work, and her courage, not her appearance. Her family, including her sisters, were in the crowd, and as she looked out at them, she saw something new in their eyes: respect. Even her mother, who had always urged her to be more like her sisters, seemed to recognize her daughter's unique beauty for the first time. When the applause faded, Chinedu approached her, his smile proud and warm. "Nneka, you were amazing. You did it. I knew you could." Nneka laughed, feeling light and free. "Thank you, Chinedu. I never thought I could feel this way, like I belong." He took her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "You've always belonged, Nneka. You just needed to see it for yourself." And in that moment, Nneka realized he was right. She didn't need to change who she was to fit in or to be noticed. She was enough, just as she was, and her worth had been there all along, waiting for her to embrace it. With a heart full of gratitude and newfound self-acceptance, Nneka stepped forward into a future that finally felt like her own. After the competition, Nneka's life took on a new rhythm, one that felt truer and freer than she had ever known. Winning second place had lit a fire inside her, and for the first time, she felt the courage to embrace her own path. Her family, especially her sisters, had taken notice of her success, and even though they still teased her from time to time, their tone was softer, with an undercurrent of admiration that hadn't been there before. In the days following the competition, Madame Adeobi promoted Nneka from apprentice to junior seamstress, giving her more responsibility around the shop. The older seamstresses now treated her with respect, often consulting her on designs, and Madame Adeobi herself began encouraging her to take on more clients. Nneka relished the change. Her confidence grew with each new dress, each happy customer. One afternoon, Madame Adeobi called her over after the shop had quieted down. "Nneka, you have a gift with fabric and design," she said, smiling warmly. "Your work stands out because you put your heart into it. You should think about building a collection. Pieces that reflect your own style and creativity." Nneka was taken aback. "A collection? Me?" She laughed nervously. "Madam, I don't know if I'm ready for that." "Nonsense. You're more than ready," Madame Adeobi insisted, waving away Nneka's doubts. "People are already noticing you. Give them more reasons to." Nneka mulled over Madame Adeobi's words that night. The idea of designing a collection thrilled her, but it also scared her. Could she really do it? She had spent so long living in the shadows, hiding her talents and trying to conform to others' expectations. But this was different. This was a chance to make something truly her own. Encouraged by Madame Adeobi's faith in her, Nneka began spending every free moment working on her collection. She sketched out designs late into the night, letting her imagination guide her. She played with vibrant colors, bold patterns, and silhouettes that expressed her own spirit, pieces that were elegant yet simple, strong yet understated, much like herself. Chinedu was a constant source of support, dropping by the shop to see her progress and listening as she described her ideas. One evening, as they sat together in the shop after closing hours, Neka showed him a sketch she had been working on. "It's beautiful, Neka," Chinedu said, admiring the intricate patterns she had drawn. "You have a way of making fabric come alive." Neka felt a warm blush rise to her cheeks. "Thank you, Chinedu. I want these pieces to mean something, to be more than just clothes. I want people to feel confident and strong when they wear them, like they're wrapped in a piece of themselves." He nodded thoughtfully. "You've come so far, Neka. I remember when you first started, how much you doubted yourself. But look at you now." She smiled, a flicker of pride warming her heart. "I never thought I'd get here, but I think maybe I'm starting to believe in myself." As the weeks went by, Neka's collection began to take shape. She crafted each dress with care, pouring her heart and soul into every stitch. Word of her new designs began to spread through the town, and soon, people were coming to Madame Adeabi's shop specifically to see Neka's collection. Her sisters, too, had become her unexpected cheerleaders, marveling at her work with newfound respect. One evening, as Neka was putting the finishing touches on her collection, her sister Ngozi came to visit her in the shop. Neka was surprised. While Ngozi had always been the most affectionate of her sisters, she had rarely shown interest in Neka's work before. "Neka, I just wanted to tell you," Ngozi began, her voice soft. "I'm proud of you. We all are." Neka looked up, her eyes wide with surprise. "Ngozi, thank you." Ngozi hesitated, then continued, her gaze downcast. "I know we used to tease you a lot, and maybe we didn't make it easy for you. I'm sorry, Neka. I didn't realize how much it hurt you." Neka's heart softened, and she gave her sister a small, forgiving smile. "It's okay, Ngozi. I know you didn't mean it, and besides, it pushed me to become who I am now. So, in a way, I'm grateful." Ngozi gave her a hug, her embrace warm and genuine. "You're amazing, Neka. You're going to go far, I know it." In that moment, Neka felt a sense of closure, a quiet peace that filled the space where her insecurities had once been. Her family's acceptance meant more to her than she'd realized, and she was grateful for their support as she moved forward with her dreams. The night before her collection debut, Neka barely slept, her nerves buzzing with anticipation. She had arranged a small show at the community hall, inviting friends, family, and regular customers from Madame Adeabi's shop. She didn't know if many people would come, but she hoped that those who did would see her vision, her growth. When the evening of the debut arrived, Neka was stunned by the turnout. The hall was filled with familiar faces, all buzzing with excitement. Chinedu was there, standing at the front with a proud smile, and her family had taken seats near the stage, her sisters looking as radiant as ever. Madame Adeabi was beaming, her hands clasped in excitement. As the lights dimmed, Neka took a deep breath, steadying herself. She stepped onto the stage to introduce her collection, her heart pounding with pride and nerves. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice trembling slightly but growing stronger as she spoke. "This collection is my way of telling a story of embracing oneself, of finding beauty in places that are often overlooked. It's about strength, confidence, and acceptance." The audience erupted in applause, and as the models began showcasing her designs, Neka watched from the side of the stage, her heart swelling with pride. Each piece moved gracefully, the fabric flowing with life and color, capturing the spirit of her journey. Her designs spoke of resilience, of the quiet beauty she had found within herself, and the audience responded with admiration and applause. When the show ended, people gathered around her, offering their praise and congratulations. Her sisters hugged her, their voices filled with pride, and her mother wiped away happy tears as she looked at her daughter with a new depth of respect. "Neka, my child," Mama Chinyere said, holding her hands tightly, "you've shown us all something beautiful tonight. I'm so proud of the woman you've become." Neka blinked back her own tears, her heart full. "Thank you, Mama. That means everything to me." As the crowd began to disperse, Chinedu approached her, his smile warm and full of admiration. "Neka, you did it. You created something amazing." Neka looked at him, feeling a happiness that was almost overwhelming. I couldn't have done it without you, Chinidu. You've been there for me every step of the way. He took her hand, his gaze soft. I only helped you see what was already inside you. The courage, the beauty. It's all yours, Neka. They stood together, hand in hand, surrounded by the echoes of applause and the warmth of the people who loved and supported her. In that moment, Neka knew that her journey was only just beginning. She had found her place, her voice, and most importantly, her worth. And she was ready to embrace whatever came next. In the weeks that followed her collection debut, Neka's life transformed. She quickly became known as one of the town's most promising seamstresses, a young woman with vision and talent. Orders for custom designs poured into Madame Adeabi's shop, and clients requested her by name. People admired her unique, confident style, and Neka found herself embracing the new opportunities with a quiet gratitude. One morning, while Neka was hard at work, Ngozi, Ogochi, and Amara burst into the shop. Their eyes were bright with excitement, and Ngozi held up a newspaper, her face beaming. "Neka, look, your name is in the paper," she exclaimed, shoving the newspaper into Neka's hands. Neka blinked in surprise as she read the headline. Local designer captivates town with unique collection. The article praised her creativity, mentioning her second-place win at the competition and her debut collection that had redefined beauty in Amufia. They'd even included a small picture of one of her designs, a brightly colored dress that represented the resilience and courage she had found within herself. "Oh my goodness," Neka whispered, unable to believe her eyes. She looked up to see her sisters smiling with pride, their faces filled with genuine admiration. "We're so proud of you, Neka," Ogochi said, giving her a hug. "Look at you. Our little sister, now a celebrity." Neka laughed, feeling both embarrassed and deeply touched. "Thank you, Ogochi, Ngozi, Amara. I couldn't have done it without all of you." Ngozi laughed. "You're the one with the talent, Neka. We just had to see it. And now everyone else does too." Her sisters stayed for a while, chatting with Neka and sharing their pride in her success. For the first time, she felt fully embraced and accepted by her family, as though they'd finally seen her for who she truly was. The love in their eyes was unmistakable, and she realized how much it meant to her to have their support. Later that evening, as she walked home, Neka's thoughts turned to the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the struggles, the endless nights spent doubting herself, and the moments when she tried so hard to be something she wasn't. She had once believed that her worth depended on fitting into a mold defined by others, but now, she understood that her true strength came from within. When she reached home, her mother was waiting for her on the porch, her eyes filled with pride and love. "Neka, my daughter," Mama Chinyur said softly, reaching out to embrace her. "You've shown me something very precious, something I didn't understand before. I was so focused on things that I thought mattered, but you've taught me that beauty is deeper than appearance." Neka felt tears prick her eyes, and she hugged her mother tightly. "Thank you, Mama. I'm grateful you see it now, and I'm grateful for everything. For all of you." Her mother nodded, holding her close. "I see it now, and I see you. You are beautiful, Neka, inside and out." As the days went on, Neka continued to work, her heart full of purpose and joy. She had found a balance between her work and her family, a space where she could thrive and be herself. She became known not just for her talent, but for the quiet confidence that radiated from her, a confidence rooted in self-acceptance. Chinidu, who had been her steadfast support, often visited her at the shop, and their friendship deepened with each passing day. One afternoon, as they strolled through the marketplace together, he turned to her, his gaze thoughtful. "Neka, I have something to ask you," he said, his voice gentle. "Would you ever consider partnering with me? I mean, in life, not just in work." Neka looked up, her heart skipping a beat as she saw the love in his eyes. She had felt it too, the steady, growing bond between them, a friendship that had blossomed into something more. "Yes, Chinidu," she replied softly, her voice filled with warmth. "I would be honored." They walked hand in hand, both feeling the quiet happiness of a future filled with possibility. Neka's journey had brought her not only closer to her dreams, but also to a love built on respect and understanding. And as she looked around at the world she had found her place in, Neka knew she was exactly where she was meant to be, at peace, confident, and truly herself.